All right, folks, thank you for joining yet another session. This one's going to be real special. We have yet to have, in the history of this conference series, a session on Teams, which is, for all intents and purposes, is probably one of the most heavily used workloads within the Microsoft 365 stack at this point, and is so integral into many of our clients, as well as anyone who really has an Office 365 or Microsoft 365 license. And specifically, we're going to be doing some other new covering is Teams as it pertains to GCC, GCC High, DoD. And so with that, I have two very special people with me today. First and foremost, here in person in the great state of Virginia, we have Ms. Rima Reyes. She is the principal program manager in the Microsoft Teams engineering product group. And by duty and personality, I would say, she serves as the chief inspiration officer, driving the U.S. federal government and DoD and related communities like the DIB towards unlocking the full potential of Microsoft Teams. And prior to her role in Teams engineering, Rima had a long career in SharePoint and worked at Northrop Grumman for quite some time, HP, and also Microsoft Federal Consulting Services. She was also one of the founding members of Women in SharePoint DC. Yeah, whoop, whoop. And worked, interestingly enough, in the White House Situation Room for about 6 years or more. So that's Rima in a nutshell. Next, we have Dave. So Dave Jennings, also part of an excellent team at Microsoft. He's the principal program manager in the Teams Customer Lifecycle Services group. And has been with Microsoft for over 13 years and currently focuses on supporting DoD, U.S. government, and DIB customer mission needs through Teams, of course. In part of Dave's tenure, he has represented Microsoft achieving joint interoperability command, JITC, certification, supporting the stringent IT operational and security mission needs for the joint warfighter. So thank you again, Rima and Dave, for joining us. So I guess jumping right into it, we're going to kind of do a Q&A style discussion here. And also, too, I should mention Dave is joining us from the great state of Indiana. So shout out to the Midwest yet again. First question. Tell us a little bit about Teams and GCC High, and what do customers need to know regarding their deployment of Teams in that version of the platform?
Yeah, that's a good question. So hey, everybody. What we're doing in GCC High right now is really, really special. We've got a lot of great customers that are using Teams. We're really pushing hard from an engineering perspective on features. So we know features are really, really important. We know, features come out commercial first, and we're really trying to close that gap. Mm-hmm. Government is really important to our leadership. Our corporate vice president, Jeff Tieper, is very, very aware and a huge champion of government. And he has really kind of taken hold with a lot of our gov clouds and just really tried to help us kind of tighten things up in terms of timelines. So we're working really, really hard to shorten some timelines around feature release. And we'll talk about features in a second. And so, our whole goal around GCC High is hopefully to reach parity or as close as we can, to parity if the government allows us to, right? Like we've got accreditation and FedRAMP and all those things we need to adhere to. But we really are excited about helping our customers move to Teams, and we want to make it the best experience possible. So we've got engineers working day and night trying to get that done. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. Dave, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, hi Sean, and thanks, Rima. Yeah, a couple of things that I would add as customers think about, what do they need to ensure they have at the ready to be successful deploying in Teams, is a couple of key areas we often see is on the front of technical readiness. First, front and center is consideration of client. So when it comes to Teams, there's actually a few different ways with how the client can be deployed. One is that users can actually access directly within the tenant itself, where they can install the client on their own. The main reason that enables that is compared to Skype for Business Pass, the Teams client doesn't require admin privileges. And also in part of that, the client actually installs as part of the user's local profile. Secondly, there's also an option where we see most often where organizations actually leverage an MSI that we make available. And so the key there, specifically as we think about GCC High, is that customers are using the client specific for that cloud base. And separately to that, making sure that they align architecture for the client being used. And so what I mean by that, as an example, using the 64-bit client with x64 machines and 32-bit client with 32-bit machines instead. And the key consideration that enables is ensure the clients are able to maximize utilization of the processing and memory resources available. The other thing that I would also note too, as it comes to GCC High specifically, aside from client, is the right level of preparation with network readiness. And because GCC High has its own dedicated set of services, if you will, key to that is making sure that we have the right ports and protocols that are allowed. A, supporting teams, but then B, also in the case of this scenario where organizations may have an existing installation of Exchange on-premise instead. And the reason that last element is important is that in order to meet often the compliance and governance requirements that come up, things like being able to do aspects of e-discovery, legal hold, etc. By having those integration points streamlined upfront, that'll assure ahead of time your success there. And then lastly is just making sure that, and we'll talk a little bit later today, but also some of the resource considerations from an end user training point of view. One of the things we'll cover later is some of the new capabilities with learning pathways.
That's great. That's great, Dave. And also, too, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe you're aware of this or not, but I think the MS 700 exam also puts a pretty big emphasis, at least if you're prepping for it, puts a pretty big emphasis for teams, admins, and engineers to look into ports and how we're managing ports and networks. And obviously, it's a very important piece of CMMC as well. And some of these organizations trying to meet some of the regulatory compliance requirements.
Absolutely.
So I think next question is, both Rima and Dave, if you could, continuing a little bit of what Dave already was speaking to, is some of the features that are availability, capabilities that are available within GCC High today. I know there's much to come, and feature parity is a tremendous goal for the team. But what do we got right now?
Yeah, so I know Dave's going to talk a little bit about governance, security, and a little bit about meetings. So Dave, I'll let you kick it off with that.
Thanks, Rima. Sure. So I guess to begin with, looking at a core feature capability point of view with GCC High today, as Rima mentioned, we've actually got a huge focus underway within Microsoft and Teams engineering specifically to accelerate more than we already have to date capabilities that we have in the other cloud services, things like for example, some of the new meeting features, some of the new meeting enhancements in terms of size and such. With having those things available in commercial today, we've got a huge momentum to making those available as sooner than later within GCC High instead. And some key areas around that with what's available today is we have the core capability of Teams where we have your traditional able to send a chat, leverage presence, participate within a team in terms of collaboration, authoring, co-authoring of documents, and so on. But then separately, we also have other enhancements we've extended to that to include capabilities around internal calling, internal meetings, both in either case where video and sharing could be added to that. And then most recently, we've made a number of enhancements to take that further also in the case of audio conferencing instead. And so the difference there is with that audio conference enhancement is really having the ability to associate traditional dial-in capabilities, people that may be joining team scheduled meetings outside of your organization, but into that native Teams experience. Separately to that, some also features we've also recently enabled are capabilities with how you can then, once you get deployed on that core feature set, how you can even extend that further in the capabilities of voice. And so what's great about that is we're often seeing more common customers taking a phased approach where they deploy first on the core capabilities of Teams. They extend that with audio conference meetings. So again, that's that dialing component as kind of the next step. And the great thing about that is since audio conferencing in GCC High specifically leverages the same infrastructure that you would use for direct voice for your users, it's an easy and seamless transition to move that towards as the final step. And then the final thing I'll just note briefly as we talk about some of those core capabilities is that there's also recently been made available enhancements around advanced voice services. So think about in some cases where an organization maybe has an auto attendant, maybe its main number that supports the corporate office or a regional site instead, where numbers can be tied to that. Users called are able to hear a greeting, they're presented with a menu option, and they're able to get routed accordingly, to the relevant department in the company. And then separate to that is also the recent updates with regards to call queues. And so the difference there is still having kind of that I'll say call center like type capability, where now you can again leverage existing infrastructure, phone numbers that you have today, and have a native experience and making that all available directly in the context of Teams and the Teams client itself. The other main element that I would also then highlight there is on the fronts of governance and security. And so the key there is, because Teams is comprised of a lot of existing services that exist in your tenant today, things like SharePoint Online, Exchange, etc., is making sure we have the right tool set in place to meet organizational mission needs, specifically in the case of GCC High. And so some of the key areas there are with regards to capabilities with e-discovery, legal hold, retention, and so on.
Yeah, and for those of you not familiar with e-discovery, really the capability there is in the event of an incident, being able to look through Teams chats across the enterprise to find where possible leakage took place, and maybe where the beginning stages of an insider threat were taking place, and maybe where a file was shared, and being able to look into any sort of incident in post across the entire Teams landscape, whether it be in chat or sharing capabilities, etc. Would you agree with that, Dave?
That is correct. Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Rima, I think you have some other capability set that you'd like to tell me about. I'm assuming you're going to tell me the GIFs are coming to GCC High.
So here's the funny thing. You call it GIFs. I call it GIFs.
GIFs.
What's the, I don't know, what's the right, who knows?
I don't think we have enough time to debate
tomato.
that. Yeah, I think it would take another session at this conference and maybe next time, folks. Look forward to that. The great debate.
The great debate. Yeah, you had mentioned this, and I chuckled before because I love GIFs. Sorry.
Yep.
I love GIFs, and I use them in commercial and in GCC, but unfortunately, they're never coming to GCC High or DoD. I know, but here's the reason why. So it points to Giphy.com. So essentially, it's getting GIFs from the internet, and so since that's outside of the accreditation boundary, that's part of the reason why they're not going to be there. So sorry, folks.
Good old security.
No more cat memes, and I even started creating GIFs just for advertising Teams for Gov, and
that's right.
I'm so bummed I can't use them in GCC High. So yeah.
We can only hope.
Yeah, but on a more, I guess, serious note, we've had a really huge stride actually recently, like 2 weeks ago. This just got deployed. So the ability to build and upload your own custom app in Teams.
Significant.
So it's huge. So even though we have now this app store available, we don't have third-party apps in there, obviously, because again, accreditation and
that's right.
Boundary things, right? But essentially you can build your own app and pin your own app in Teams. And there's ways also to secure that so that you're only maybe showing or testing an app to a few users versus the whole agency or organization.
That's right.
We've got a lot of content on that on our blogs, on our tech communities blogs, by the way.
Yep. We'll drop some links in chat, by the way.
Yeah, but that to me is going to be a really huge game changer, because when you have that capability now, which we call part of our team's platform and extensibility, you can, for example, one of the simplest things that you can do is actually pin a SharePoint site to the app bar, which is huge. We've had a lot of agencies in GCC pin a SharePoint site. Maybe it's their help desk site. Maybe it's their learning pathways, right? Like they've got an option to use Learning Pathways, which is a prepackaged SharePoint training site that you can pin, which you can actually do in GCC High. We've got a blog for that too.
Yeah.
So that's a huge win for a lot of folks, because it gives them a central place to go, just to kind of visit, to say, where do I get help? How do I find
some
more
knowledge base or what have you?
Yeah, and it's all within one window. So, we're kind of seeing that reduction in having 20 different windows open, or people asking their coworkers, where do I go?
Yeah.
It's really seamless now, having that relationship, especially in that. I mean, that's just one of a million different options, but I get really excited about platforms. So sorry, because I came from the SharePoint world.
Yeah, I was about to say, and Jeff Tieper, I'm sure, is really excited about some of the references you're dropping to SharePoint.
Right. Yeah. So like having, that really deep tie-in between SharePoint and Teams, even more so gets me pumped.
Yeah.
Now the thing with GCC High that we did want to mention is that, you don't have right now the packet. There's like an app called App Studio to kind of bundle your app and deploy it. But you can do it through Visual Studio.
Okay.
We're actually getting ready to release a new version of how you would deploy apps anyways.
Okay.
So I won't say too much about that, but that's coming.
Be on the lookout.
Yeah, exactly. So, so that will come out to GCC High as well. So here soon. So, and then, like I mentioned before, we'll make sure to have those links for those resources, just because I think being able to do something that's so valuable to a business around building an app.
Yeah.
And I hate saying the word business. I should say organization or agency, because again,
we're catching what you're pitching.
Yeah, thank you. I'm like big on that too, right? It's important to bring people into the environment and to have a single central place to communicate and collaborate from. And having this like platform capability exposed now in Teams allows people to bring data from other applications that are, that folks are working in already, and naturally have that come into a conversation, which is huge. Like not having to click, 1,000 different times to go find something, copy the URL, paste it in a Teams chat. Like, mind blowing, right? Yeah. And so platform allows you to kind of bring some of those connectivities together, which we've seen a huge uptick in how it's changed the landscape in GCC already. And we're hoping the same thing's going to happen in GCC High.
Yeah. We've seen this in other organizations, even some of ours, where you have folks that were just such heavy SharePoint users, let's say, and just having to kind of bringing that into the Teams fold, even more so with some of these custom applications, really allows that integration to be even more rich, and basically get to where they need to go without having to hop between both products in many cases. So I know one thing too that we wanted to talk about and internally. So Summit 7 is also on GCC High, something that internally we were just talking about in one of our channels today. Our team's very excited to see this in public preview. Is some of the basically the multi-window situation. Can you kind of explain what that feature is and how folks could be looking forward to that in GCC High?
Yeah, I'll kick it off and I'll let Dave explain it, because Dave's great at explaining a lot of really complex things.
Get ready, Dave.
So multi-window is really key in terms of productivity. So in Skype, right, we used to have the ability to have different windows in chat, right?
Yes.
And you could kind of move things where you needed to be, or you could minimize somebody's chat window if they were being really annoying. Like, you could kind of like determine your landscape.
We never
so to speak,
did that,
right?
We never did that.
Yeah, and so now we're bringing that feature and that functionality into Teams, because people ask for that. Like, before. You're in a meeting, you're still in the same Teams application. Like you had to kind of bounce between everything. You didn't have the opportunity to kind of toggle between windows. It was all just one window. And so bringing any of our multi-window capabilities are really, really key. Dave, do you want to?
And to be clear, just before we launch, Dave, be ready. You are saying this is on the client, right? So not obviously in the browser version. You're talking about in the client, you can have multiple windows. So Dave, back to you.
Thanks, John. No, you, both you and Rima summarized well, and and I think the key takeaway there, which is really exciting, is again, compared to the initial release of Teams, where all your actions had to be done within a single window within the client itself. What this really further allows is that optimization where users have flexibility and choice, as Rima mentioned. When you join a meeting, you can separately pop that out. You could even, if you happen to have a setup with dual monitors, you could have your main Teams client on one side and your meeting context on the other. And what's really great that enables is optimizing that workflow on what is best for the end user in that case.
That's great. That's great. So I guess another building on that, what are some things that we can expect maybe next month or in the coming months as it pertains to Teams and GCCI?
Yeah, so I know the multi-window for meetings is going to be out probably around like middle to end of next month.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've got Windows 10 notifications coming out, and we've got a few other things that have just released as well. So for example, presenter view in the Teams meetings for PowerPoint sharing.
That's
So
right.
I don't know about you all, but I share PowerPoints all the time.
Yes.
Like that's like the thing, right? It's
Yep.
like that's it's PowerPoint kind of spewing out, right? So for me, before I used to have the challenge where I'm like, okay, like let me share my screen where I have that in presentation mode, but I need to see my notes. Like,
Yes.
so now you have that embedded in Teams. So
It's a
as a
juggling act.
presenter,
Yeah.
you can see your notes. And you're like, great, okay, I know what I'm talking about, right? When there's like, nothing on a slide. So that's really great. And then also what's recently come out too is that you can now have up to 100 people share meeting notes, which was really, I mean, before I believe it was only like 20 people could share meeting notes.
Mm-hmm.
Now you've got up to 100, and it's great. I mean, a lot of people in Gov specifically really rely on meeting notes,
Yeah.
Because it's a function that's so easy to kind of pop out when you're in a meeting. You just start taking notes.
That's right.
So that's a huge win, especially for those larger meetings that we have now.
And for posterity, like what was that link that such and such talked about? What was that?
Right.
That kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. I know the other thing I wanted to kind of touch on was, we get a lot of questions around this, around the integration between clouds,
Mm-hmm.
and what works and what doesn't. And so Dave's worked a lot with GCC High customers, which is, part of the reason why he's such an expert in this
Mm-hmm.
space. Dave has, I think, worked with, almost all of them. So Dave's pretty famous, I'm sure, in the GCC High space. But Dave, I don't know if you wanted to touch on kind of what integrations work today, and also like between chat and also maybe some of the meeting join experience.
Thanks, Rima. Sure. Yes. So a few key areas that we often see as GCC High customers really go big, scaling out their deployment on Teams, is the capability through federation, which is very synonymous to how this used to work with Skype for Business past. And what's great about that is even though customers today may be in GCC High, they currently have the ability getting deployed on Teams where they can reach out and communicate directly to external partners that they may, or customers as well, they may be working with that maybe reside in the commercial or the government, what we refer to as GCC, or even other GCC High tenants instead. And then the other thing that's also great about that is if customers happen to have that they're working with happen to have an on-premise deployment of Skype, that supportability is there as well. So what's great is, again, keeping that focus context directly within Teams. Customers in GCC High can enter in often the SIP or email address of the user they're looking to reach. The directory will reach out and locate that user, and within one click, they can initially start a conversation, quickly extend that to a call, including video, sharing content, and if needed, easily expand that into meeting capability instead. So that's really been key, top of mind that we've seen in the GCC High space. Separate to that, then is also the capability with regards to meetings, and so that is one of the unique differences with Teams and GCC High, and that when you're joining a meeting with another GCC High customer, as looking at both organizations being on Teams, there is that native join experience with the desktop client itself. However, if as a GCC High user, you're invited to join a Teams meeting in one of the other clouds, so looking at commercial or GCC instead, the difference there is you'll get an additional window that surfaces where effectively you get a revised join link. You will then have to paste that into a browser, and then we'll have to join that meeting instance in the context of that browser setting instead, and vice versa. If in the event you're inviting, again, customers, partners that are coming from the other clouds, again, whether that's commercial or GCC, they will have to do the same, but the key reason for that is today, given the security posture and the difference in architecture across the three instances of Teams in that case.
That's great.
Yeah, I wanted to highlight kind of something that Dave said that was really important. So we have a lot of confusion today with organizations that sit, both, they're sitting GCC High, maybe they want to communicate with GCC or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this notion that like, oh, well, we can't communicate with those folks. I'm like, no, that's not true. I swear you actually can. So actually 2 weeks ago, I was meeting with a pretty high up government person, and he was saying, hey, listen, like, this is what I'm hearing. I'm like, those are all rumors. Let me actually show you. So I sat through and showed him, hey, this is what the meeting join experience is like. You can join a meeting if it's hosted in GCC High, or a GCC High user can join a meeting even if it's hosted in GCC or commercial.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of a different join experience today, but we're looking to improve that in the future. But and there's reasons, I should say, for that, because of boundaries, accreditation, things like that. But that is possible, and also being able to chat, like David mentioned around the one-on-one chat federation. Being able to federate with another entity that's in GCC or commercial, that works today, and that's a huge boon to productivity, because that allows, I think, organizations who have the security need, kind of who sit up in GCC High, still be able to communicate with folks outside of their organization in a way that makes sense for them, and still have all those security policies apply.
Yeah.
And I think that's key. That's huge. And then, I know we're probably going to talk next about, well, what's coming next.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was going to be your next
Especially
question.
when it comes to, being able to access across tenants and all that kind of good stuff. I mean, what's on the future in terms of communicating across tenants and that accreditation boundary across sovereign cloud versus non-commercial GCC? What's on the horizon as it pertains to guest access and sharing and communicating across those lines?
Yeah, we were just talking about guest access actually earlier this week. So, guest access is coming soon. And so, Dave, I don't know if you want to kind of talk a little bit about guest access, and then I'll talk a little bit about, the second part of guest access.
Sure, Rima. Yeah, so as a further extension to some of the other external collaboration capabilities that we talked through earlier, really under the guise of traditional federation and external meeting join experience for Teams and GCC High today. One of the big ask that we've heard, quite often is how can we even make this easier with having a guest, we use the term guest access capability, but would further allow within a GCC High tenant to add someone outside of your organization that has an actual identity that could be leveraged to be a member of a team instead. So compared to traditional federation, where you get core capabilities around chat, calling, and meetings, guest access will actually even take this a step further, where you can extend all the collaboration capabilities Teams provides by adding someone outside of your tenant to be a member of that team. And what's really great is you can use that as the central point to stay in touch with communication. Again, you have the right controls at your disposal in terms of what that guest identity can and cannot do. And even further, you have controls available to which other domains, if you will, that are allowed to be guest in that particular context. And then the other thing that's great, which we know is often top of mind for GCC High customers, is the additional security elements around that. And so what's really great with this forthcoming feature is you'll be able to pair that with other options with like conditional access as an example. So being able to have a further set of controls to restrict where those guest entry points are coming from, being able to enforce other capabilities around, multi-factor authentication, forcing those potential identities to read through and accept terms of use and that type of thing. And the key across that is having the right level of secure controls in place to really extend those collaboration needs.
That's great. That's great. What else do we have?
Yeah, so we've got, kind of like within GCC High guest access coming here really, really soon.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially a GCC High to GCC High, tenant or organization can essentially have guest access with each other.
Mm-hmm.
We are still really actively working towards having like cross cloud federation with guest access.
Right.
Something that a lot of folks don't realize too is that Teams is beholden to a lot of other engineering organizations within Microsoft, right? So think of us kind of like a funnel to like everything else that's in O365,
right,
including identity. So, before in the past, we've had the sovereign cloud, right, where identity was kept separate. And so now we're trying to figure out, hey, how do we bridge that gap in a way that still makes sense, that still, is going to be, fitting the accreditation needs of the US government, but still allow for that cross collaboration between clouds. So that is something we are actively working towards and working on. I don't have a date, otherwise I'd tell you, but we are marching towards it as soon as we can.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. What about some other things that may not be as critical per se to operations, but things like reacting to messages? I believe that's kind of on the horizon, right?
Yeah. So people love meetings features, right? Like anything that's like a really fun kind of like cool thing in a meeting. People
like
go
GIFs, right? Right.
Sorry.
I had to bring it back up. But yeah, continue.
I know. Sorry, it's a sore topic. Yeah. So meeting reactions in a meeting, meaning essentially as a user, if you're in a meeting, you can click on an icon and you can heart something, you can clap something, you can like thumbs up, that kind of thing. Those meeting reactions are coming in March, so that's really exciting for GCC High. I use them all the time. So when other people are talking, I literally, press the heart icon to say, hey, like I love what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it just really makes it more interactive and engaging.
Yeah.
People kind of immediately get that visual feedback that, they like what you're saying or people like what you're actually talking about.
Or just paying attention.
That too. Yeah. No, I mean, with camera on, right? Like you can't really sleep or do anything, right?
That's right.
Not that I would ever condone that.
What else is on the horizon?
Yeah, so we've got some interesting changes around stream and call recording.
Right, which I think those have hit commercial and GCC, right? Some
correct.
of these changes, or at least it's rolling out now.
Yeah, and I'll touch on this. So essentially, when a meeting is recorded, before in the past it used to go by default into stream. Now we're changing that methodology where it goes, into OneDrive and SharePoint. So that's a newer, kind of interaction with how call recordings are taking place.
Yep.
I personally love it. I think it makes more sense because I'm naturally living in those spaces anyways.
Yeah.
Like, I like having the ability to kind of see, hey, something's already popped up. I already have access to it. Great.
Right.
Now I know what to do with that call recording. And then the other thing too is being able to share that call recording outside, if you've got like, guest access or things like that.
That's right.
Which is also key. So that'll be coming too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, what are things that are even more forward looking? What are you all hoping to basically achieve in 2021? By year's end, that kind of thing. If we were to wrap up 2021 and you looked back, what are some things that you expect would be in your rear view mirror, if you will?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think, with Teams, you're going to see a lot more features around an enhanced meeting experience across the board. I think we've got some revolutionary things coming out that people are going to be really surprised that I think no other product has out there yet. And it's really going to make productivity within a meeting that much more powerful
and enriched.
Yeah. I think people I can't talk about it, but I've seen some pictures and mock-ups. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty cool. I'm pumped for it because I know it's going to help me. So that's great. I know our goals around deployment, like I had mentioned before, we want to try to get to as close as we can to feature parity.
Yeah.
Compared to the other clouds, it's very, very important for us to have a seamless experience, no matter where that user lives,
Mhm.
whether it's, even DoD, GCC High, GCC, since we have so many users, on these 3 different clouds.
Yeah.
And so for us, as we kind of look to the future, we're really trying to tighten those timelines. We're trying to see how much we can release in the shortest amount of time.
Right.
And so that's really kind of our goal within 2021 is to close that gap and make sure people have the best in class experience when it comes to Teams.
That's
So they don't feel like, hey, I feel like I'm gypped, right? I always get that, like, I feel gypped. We don't want anybody to feel gypped. We're trying
Right.
super, super hard to make sure that everybody has a great, great, great experience in Teams.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
and Dave, I'm sure Dave wants to add a little bit more about, future too. So
Yeah.
Thanks, Rima. Yeah, I think a couple of additional things that I would note that I often get asked on is within I would say the next couple of months, you're going to see a large number of features coming to the service in GCC High, and part of that, a few that stand out are things like offline presence. So think about having the ability to still leverage the full capability of Teams, but being able to signal to your colleagues that you're unavailable in that light, whereas today you do have to have some sort of present status that is leveraged instead. And another one that we see asked on quite often too, which is quite exciting, is the capability of virtual breakout rooms. So think about where instead of a traditional Teams meeting context today, dynamically to be able to further divide that, assign participants where again, you can manage that experience within one setting, but even be more productive in the core capabilities that Teams meetings provide today. And then the other thing I would also highlight are some of the additional more immersive experiences as we think about with customers being deployed on Teams today, really taking things to that next level as we think of that single pane of glass more from a Meta OS point of view. So as Rima mentioned, we're starting to get some of the entryways to that with what we use the term platform support. So today you do have an initial capability where within the context of Teams, you can start to shortcut pen, make available direct access to other internal secured corporate assets and resources. But later this year, we're really seeing what's next is taking that step forward where Teams really broader becomes that Meta OS and how customers support and execute on their day-to-day.
That's great. That's great. Anything else?
no, I did want to just comment the fact that offline feature is really great. It's stealthy.
Uh-huh.
Like I love it.
Uh-huh.
Dave's laughing because he knows, like, I'll do it. Like I'll go offline at night, even though like I'm secretly still working, but nobody knows. Like
That's
I'm
right.
online, right?
That's right.
I gotta keep it. I gotta keep it stealthy, right?
That's right. That's right. Can't let anybody know. Yeah. All right. So I think next would really just be, you guys have mentioned a lot of features. I think we've also touched on some things to come. And I think the best place for folks to not only learn about the ones that are already available, but also too, as things roll out, where are some places that they can see those new features or hear about them, read about them, etc.
Yeah. Our best place to go, honestly, it's going to be really your kind of your gold mine or fountain of gold, I should say, is the message center in the admin portal within Office 365. So if you go to the Office 365 admin center, there's a message center area where you can kind of see all of the messages that say, hey, this is what's coming, or here's what just released. And it'll tell you timelines. What's really cool about that is that it's unique to your tenant and specific to your cloud, right? So like
it's curated. Exactly.
And engineering, all the different engineering teams essentially build those posts. So that's where that's coming from. So it's kind of like a source of truth as well as the fountain of gold or whatever it may be, right?
Right.
For information. Like even sometimes when I want to know about what other products are releasing, I'll go to like my test GCC High tenant and go look. I'm like, oh, what's SharePoint doing? Like, cool. And then the other thing that's a really great place that, Dave and I actually, we post a lot. We also watch it a lot. Is the Tech Communities blog for public sector.
Yeah. Shout out to Sarah Gilbert, by the way, who manages that community. So
she's awesome. It's a very popular community, all because of her. She's
Mhm.
amazing. If you don't know her, follow her on Twitter. She's
That's
awesome.
right. We'll drop some links to her account as well as the public sector tech community.
Yes, and that place is where we're publishing a lot of content about things that maybe, docs might not have that we're trying to supplement, or we've got a lot of folks who've tried and tested out certain things or figured out certain things, like learning pathways in GCC High.
Mm-hmm.
One of our customer engineers actually, posted a blog on that, and that's a great resource to go and find. And Dave and I, we review anything around Teams that before it's posted. So along with Sarah does too. So that content is really quality. It's tried and true, and it's tested. It's good content. So
because where you start at Message Center, you're kind of getting the headlines, if you will, and if you go to tech community or the public sector tech community, you're getting a little bit more of the news story. How exactly do I deploy this new feature or turn it on or use it, whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Dave, you want to add anything to that?
Thanks, Sean. No, I think you summarized well. The other thing that I would just highlight is part of a lot of this innovation that we're bringing to the GCC High space over the next couple months. I would just highlight going out to the 365 roadmap. We've done a lot of enhancements for the Gov space specifically, and more details on that to come.
Dave, thank you all the way from Virginia to Indiana. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. And also, too, thanks, Rima, obviously, for meeting us here and joining CS2. So we look forward to having you guys sometime in the near future, sometime again this year. Maybe we'll talk about some of these new features in post. Awesome. Well, good deal. Well, thank you, guys. We'll see you at the next one.